Hello, and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Financial Exploitation of Senior Alabamians, the Scams, Pain, and Tactics for Prevention. If you have questions about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email address are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handouts, sign-in sheet, and evaluations are all available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access those materials. 1.5 continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for today's program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return the sign-in sheet and evaluation, as well as take the post-test. While content may continue to be relevant, continuing education credit will only be awarded for 1 year for nurses, expiring on May 31st of 2019, and 2 years for social workers, expiring on May 31st, 2020. Now, let's meet our presenters. Amanda Senn is the General Counsel and Acting Deputy Director of the Alabama Securities Commission, and Julie Waters is the Program and Planning Division Chief at the Alabama Department of Senior Services. Let's go ahead and begin.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you'll learn a lot. I have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. My name is Amanda Senn. I'm General Counsel and now Acting Deputy Director of Enforcement with the Securities Commission. I've been with the office nearly 10 years, but I had my start with the Department of Public Health, so I'm delighted to be back in their studios. I was an environmentalist at the time. So you guys do great work. Nurses, I understand, are in the audience, and maybe some social workers. Y'all keep at it. I know what a tough job it is. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do at the Securities Commission. We regulate the securities industry. I ask this question all the time in grand jury. For a show of hands, you know, who knows what the Securities Commission does? Have you ever heard of us? And some of them will raise their hands and they'll say, sure, we know what you do. You regulate security guards. That's not entirely true unless the security guard is selling stocks and bonds in the state. So we require anybody who sells any type of security, which could be, as you'll see soon, a stock, bond, anything with an investment type, anything that you can invest in Alabama. So those documents themselves, or the transaction itself, which becomes a security, we have jurisdiction over those. We require the people selling securities in the state to be registered with us, and those selling on behalf of a company to be registered. So we do that to maintain the integrity of our securities markets in Alabama. We have civil, criminal, and administrative authority to enforce the laws pertaining to securities. So we prosecute our own cases in-house, which is pretty cool. I'll talk a little bit about those laws in our office later. We are located in downtown Alabama, RSA Commerce Building. We have nearly 58 employees, according to my slide. And we're self-funded, so we do contribute to the general fund, and we raise money through our licensing fees. As you guys know, every agency enforces an act. Ours is a Securities Act, and it just lists the things that I talked about. But what we really do is better depicted through a video. So I'm going to turn you guys over to a short video about what we actually do.
Scamsters. They defraud retirees out of billions each year. It doesn't matter how educated we are or how sophisticated we seem, the older we get, the more susceptible we become. And with 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 each day, scamsters are having a field day. For more than 2 decades, Joe Borg has been on the front line battling the scamsters and protecting Main Street investors from fraud and abuse at the Alabama Securities Commission.
We license and we regulate the industry, the legitimate parts, and the illegitimate parts, well, those we prosecute. We will, when necessary, indict or prosecute criminals for stealing from Main Street investors.
Under his leadership, the ASC boasts a conviction rate of more than 95%. In short, Borg and the ASC are a fraudster's worst nightmare.
Okay.
One issue they've been going hard after is senior fraud.
Seniors, those 60 and older, their assets are in the trillions. And therefore, that is a very attractive prize for scamsters and con artists to go after.
As Borg has seen all too often, a scamster's approach is two-pronged. starting with friendliness and followed by scare tactics.
They will attract investors, especially seniors, by pretending to care, by keeping notes about what they talk about, and they give them the attention maybe they're not getting somewhere else. On top of that, when they get their trust, then in comes the fear factor. What happens if you run out of money? What happens if your kids are not there to take care of you? I've got a way to solve that problem. Let's invest in whatever it may be. And usually the best scams ripped right out of the headlines because there's a grain of truth to it.
Borg has a list of scams to look out for to help protect your hard-earned money.
If you're going to look at the frauds in general, affinity fraud that's connected to cultural, ethnic, religious, or fraternal. Let's watch out for things like high-yield scams, like the prime banknotes. Let's watch out for oil and gas when the rates start going back up. We want to watch out for those Iraqi dinars that somehow are going to magically all of a sudden be worth a lot of money. And let's watch out for what we call cryptocurrency. Currently, Bitcoin is one type that could fluctuate up and down and could be gone tomorrow. Seniors have to be vigilant when it comes to their money. They worked hard for it, all their lives for it. If you're not going to take care of it, what makes you think somebody else will? You are the first line of defense.
Although fraud comes in many forms, there are many ways to protect yourself.
What happens with our older generation is they're more trusting. If you don't know who it is, maybe you don't need to make that phone call. If you do take that phone call and it's somebody you don't know and they're trying to be your friend and you don't know where they came from, hang up the phone. John Smith wants me to invest $20,000 in an oil and gas deal, and I'm going to take money out of my CD or my bank to do it. Well, who is John Smith? Is he licensed? Is he registered? The best thing investors can do, and of all ages, not just seniors, find out if they're licensed. Besides just checking with the state regulator, call your local DA, district attorney's office, county attorney's office. You can also check with the SEC in Washington, D.C. Just plug in sec.gov on a website, and their numbers will pop up as well. One of the big warnings we give to seniors right now is when their bank supposedly sends them an email and says, gee, somebody may have gotten into your account. We want to verify it's you. Please give us your name, your address, and your password to your account. No bank, no financial professional that's legitimate will ever, on the internet, ask you for your password, your account number, unless you go to their website first. Never, ever respond to somebody that's asking you for information. Clear out, start fresh. I think the biggest fear factor for some of our seniors is that if they ask for help, they think their family's going to think they can't handle their affairs, and that's just not true. Don't try and do it on your own. Seek other competent help, perhaps a trusted advisor, your banking friend, a lawyer, maybe even members of your own family if there are folks that understand the financial markets.
And if you do suspect you're a victim of fraud, don't be afraid to report it.
If you do see it, don't be embarrassed to report it. I guarantee that if you've been taken in a scam, you're not the only one that's in the same scam. And just think, if you report it early enough, not only maybe can we get some of the money back, but maybe some of your closest friends won't get scammed.
Find out more by visiting wi65.org or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
All right, you guys have just heard from our director, Joe Borg. He has been with the commission now for 25 years, and he has been promoting an enforcement agenda his entire time. So we are very aggressive when it comes to enforcement issues and going after those people who do rip off Alabama residents, and especially those that rip off our senior citizens. Joe said something at the end of the film, don't be afraid to come forward, and this is where you guys can help and step in. A lot of our seniors, since you guys tend to interact with our seniors, just need someone to talk to at times. If you hear something unusual, if you're just having a conversation with someone and they talk about, maybe an investment type thing they heard, or some kind of pitch or claim, sales pitch, talk to them and find out a little more information. In my opinion, and I've just been doing this almost 10 years, senior exploitation and some of the frauds against seniors are where child abuse was 25, 30 years ago. These crimes and these cases are just now coming to light, and it's because of people like you that are out in the field educating our seniors on some of these crimes. They don't feel like what's happened is actually a crime, or whether a lot of times they don't feel like there's something that can be done about it. They're scared, and they don't have anyone to turn to. I can sing about that all day long, so I'll get to it more toward the end. But let me talk for a minute about the security, because that's where we come in, and this is how we can help. If you hear of something that in any way involves an investment type transaction, in the video, Mr. Borg mentioned John Smith. If John Smith comes over and asks you for Miss Jane $10,000, and he says, "Hey, Miss Jane, I understand you're trying to save money for your granddaughter's college tuition. I think I can help you with that. If you've got $10,000, I'll give you $20,000 in 3 months, and I can turn your money around and provide you this interest, because I have a real estate program that I'm involved with. But don't worry about anything. You don't have to do anything, but just wait and give me the money, invest the money with me, and I'll do all the work and I'll provide you those returns." We have just entered into an investment contract, which is a security under the law. I mentioned earlier that just about anything could be a security. I could turn this pen into a security if I wanted it to acknowledge some type of debt investment relationship. So as you can see from the slide, there's a laundry list of things, and it continues on, but all of these represent essentially that investment type contract, whether it's oral or written. So we have jurisdiction to start investigating any activity, senior financial exploitation, if there's that type relationship there. And more securities. Goodness, I have 3 slides here, actually 4. The investment contract was one that I mentioned because it allows us to bring in a greater array of instruments, and it is governed by a Howey test. This is a legal thing, but essentially it was the relationship that I described between John Smith and Miss Jane, an investment of money into a common enterprise, and that person expects a profit. So you guys have learned something new. If you didn't know what the Howey test was, which I'm sure you didn't, I had no clue what it was until I started with the commission, and I still go back and read the Howey test occasionally. Securities violations. All right, let me stop right here. Securities violations. So what can we do if there's financial exploitation and a security is involved? We can bring criminal charges to punish the offender. We can handle it administratively, or we can seek some type of civil relief. Let's just use Miss Jane and John Smith, for example. So John, our defendant in this action, has just taken Miss Smith's $20,000. May have been $10,000. He promised her $20,000, so $10,000. He absconds with the money. We learned that he's actually taken it and spent it on what we find in some cases is wild women and booze, believe it or not, from our defendant. So he's blown it. He did not invest in the real estate as he promised Miss Jane he would. So he has committed fraud. In my opinion, as a prosecutor of these cases, I would allege that John Smith has just committed fraud. So we could charge him with a Class B felony, securities fraud, and we've also got enhanced violations against seniors. And I have a slide on those later, but essentially, in any case that involves someone 60 or older, we can bring Class B felonies on top of that. So that's something that we can do to seek type of justice for these cases. But in every criminal case, you ask for restitution. So there's the potential for our victim not likely to get all the money back, but occasionally it does happen where we can return the victims their money in these cases. We have a couple of other charges that we can bring, companion charges, because a lot of these schemes involve theft, forgery, conspiracy. We have cases, actually I have one now in Jefferson County involving a doctor and a lawyer defendant conspiring to commit a $12 million fraud against 40 Alabama residents. Guys, it happens all the time. So what are they doing? What types of scams are they running in Alabama, and what do you guys need to be aware of as you're out in the field? We see it all. Mr. Borg, I think, said on the video, the scams are ripped right out of the headlines. Right now, cryptocurrency is a big one. It's in red at the bottom. You can't turn on the television without hearing about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or an ICO or Ethereum. And I'm no expert in digital currency, and the fraudsters aren't either, but they're using the language that they see in the papers and on the news to perpetuate a fraud. So we see a lot of people online offering these huge investment and initial coin offerings, which is just like a public offering for a stock, except it's a digital thing. And the investors, a lot of them in Alabama are giving money. We have 2 open cases right now where Alabamians have invested in these things. And of course the defendants are just stealing the money. You might ask how we have jurisdiction over an electronic coin, but the way these things are being sold and packaged, it's become an investment contract. So these people are investing with the companies with the expectation of a profit. So beware of the cryptocurrency and ICOs. Several others listed are the crowdfunding, internet offers, a lot of stuff online. Our office will take calls. We take calls from the public about particular individuals who are soliciting money. We can run a background check on them to see whether they're registered, and if they are, to see what is in their background that may affect the relationship that you have with this person. So if you ever think about investing with someone, call us and we'll check it out and share that information, because not a lot of people are aware that we do actually have a database of these people, these licensed people who are financial planners in the state. So crowdfunding, internet offers, the EB5, you can see there's just fraud for every headline in the paper. I want to draw your attention to a couple of them near the bottom, the high yield investment and Ponzi scheme. I'm going to show you guys another video because I think it's easier for you to understand how these crimes are committed when you hear it from the victims themselves. I know some of you are thinking, well, how would this happen? I would never invest money with somebody. But you guys, it happens. Our victims come from all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers. We've got several teachers in a case right now. You know, people in church. That's one of our biggest pool of victims is within a church, because they're crimes of trust. And you want to trust people, and I don't want to discourage anybody from not trusting someone, but occasionally you get a bad egg and that person is going to rip you off. But especially in the South, we have that Southern hospitality and we do tend to trust people. So that's how these crimes are committed. And the defendants will use such sophisticated language in some of these scams and provide documents that make it appear that they really know what they're talking about. And for most of us, we don't study. We should study personal finance, but we don't, and rely on others to handle that for us. So you want to know how these people get involved? You're going to hear from them yourself in just a minute. A couple of other investor threats. We've had the gold and precious metals thing. Had a couple in South Alabama who was contacted by an individual who the individual had done some research on our victims, and he knew that these people had holdings in gold and precious metals already, because they can find out anything over the internet. And so he cold called an elderly couple in South Alabama and asked them if they wanted to invest in more gold and precious metals. Of course, this relationship went on over the phone for some time. Our defendants sent out what appeared to be legitimate financial statements of his holdings in the company, and he used it as evidence of the profitability of his company. So they invested. They gave him $200,000 over the course of a year, and of course he spent it. We were able to obtain his bank records through their checks, their approved and cleared checks, and we were able to track him down through those records. So just don't invest, and tell people that you work with, and when you're in the homes of the elderly and they start talking about it, preach to them about that, because in Alabama we have a lot of financial exploitation going on. Private offerings, some of this crazy stuff. Real estate is a big one, and then just unlicensed individuals. So people who are not licensed with us to sell securities. We have a lot of that in Alabama. under the Securities Act, if you are selling securities and you're not registered, that is, pursuant to our act, a Class C felony violation. So that is a particularly egregious act. You got to get registered. So I'm going to turn it over to the next video, and I want you guys to hear from one of our victims in the high yield investment scam. This case happened post-2008, at a time after the bubble. People couldn't get loans. The banks weren't giving loans, and these defendants knew that, and they completely exploited those opportunities. And so I'll let you guys hear from Mr. Cantrell.
Well, when we were seeking a loan from Mr. Tucker, we had an apartment redevelopment or rehab project in Houston, Texas, and it was going to run around $5 million. And it was actually to take an apartment complex that was in Houston, totally run down, totally vacant, asbestos, aluminum wiring, and what we were focusing on is revitalizing certain parts of the city. And that's when we sought this loan to be able to redo that. Yeah, the process, as it was described to me by both the intermediary and the documentation we got from Mr. Tucker, was that they were going to give us a loan commitment, and this loan commitment also stated that we had to put money up into a trust. A portion of it was for some due diligence on the property and the project itself, but then the balance was supposed to stay in trust so that they could then go get these instruments that they would then back the loans, but it was supposed to stay in the attorney's bank account until all of that transpired. Yeah, the only reason that we would be willing to do this type of loan is that there was an actual attorney involved in the process, and it was an attorney here stateside, because initially when we were seeking out this type of funding, there was several people, we'll put it into a trust account in London or someplace like that, and we were absolutely not. This was explained to us that an attorney here in the U.S. would hold the funds in trust until the loan was actually funded, and then they would release those funds as part of the closing transaction. So absolutely, that's the only reason we looked at doing it. Well, when we were looking at this from an attorney's involvement perspective, we felt that because there was a U.S. attorney specifically involved with it, it was held to a different standard. And it gave us as a company and as a group a very good sense of security that, okay, that this would happen. If it didn't, then we'd be able to get our money back. But that's the main reason that we ended up moving forward. We tried to communicate directly with the lawyer when it first happened. We also did a search on him to make sure he was an accredited attorney and he was in good standing. And as this happened, we did communicate, got his information to wire the funds, and everything seemed legit at the time. And but then as the thing kind of progressed on, then we started asking the questions, well, is our money safe? And then as you ask more pointed questions, well, is the money still in the account? And that's when we found out it was not. Well, no, I don't believe Mr. Williams acted responsibly towards us, because as we talked about, and our understanding of the process was nothing as it transpired. Because if we had known up front that the funds were going to go into his account and then they were going to leave prior to the funding of the loan, we would not have done the transaction. Once we figured out things were going sideways, then we started contacting Mr. Tucker. He had an assistant, and unfortunately I don't remember his name at this point in time, but he had an assistant who was also kind of fielding my phone calls, and then Mr. Tucker kind of went by the wayside, and a lot of emails were back and forth with a lot of promises that it was still going to happen, but obviously it did not. Yeah, the partnership there, they were close friends, and obviously to say now they entrusted me because I was the one that was the leading point on this, and because the attorney and the scam, I obviously don't have those friendships anymore. And it makes it very, very difficult. We're trying to make right by everybody and still moving forward, and even the funds that we've lost, trying to recoup that, but I have a feeling we'll never recoup it fully.
So you guys have just heard from Mr. Cantrell, who was a victim in the Synergy Finance case involving Richard James Tucker, the defendant, who's just a crook. There's nothing more to say about him. He's just a piece of crap crook. He was prosecuted and sentenced to prison in Baldwin County, but he hooked up with a lawyer out of Atlanta, and he used that lawyer to give the scam some legitimacy. So people trust lawyers, right? The defendant told the victims that the funds that they invested with him would be held in the lawyer's trust account. Even the use of that term, lends credence to any type of investment, or allows the victim to think that this money really is going to be held here because it's in a trust account. What the victims didn't know was that the defendant had instructed the lawyer to send the money on to these other crooks. So what we have is a relationship, an investment type relationship or an investment contract, and then we have fraud committed in connection with the sale of that security or that investment. So securities fraud in Alabama is proved just like that. Any type of fraudulent statement, material misstatement or omission, if he fails to tell you something that is material in connection with the solicitation of the investment, you've just committed securities fraud. Mr. Cantrell believed that he would get a loan, an advance fee type loan from Tucker if he gave him, and I can't remember the exact amount, but several $100,000. Tucker would then turn it into a multi-million-dollar loan, and he would be able to use that loan for a humanitarian project in California. And so those were the representations made. Of course, that didn't happen. Tucker stole the money. He bought his girlfriend a diamond ring. Because the records don't lie, we're able to track down every expense of these crazy people who think that we just are unable to locate their records and then themselves. So we knew exactly how the money was spent. And Cantrell will likely not see a fraction of his return, if anything. The defendant was also ordered to pay restitution, but it's such a nominal amount, and he was collecting some money from work release. So these are how, what you've just heard is an example of how securities fraud happens and how you can quickly become a victim. The lawyer pled guilty, and he has to pay back a certain amount of money, but he also completed several other onerous requirements too. We're pretty harsh on lawyers. I am, especially as a lawyer, and you guys wouldn't believe the number of lawyers that appear as victims and defendants in our case. So we want them out of the industry, certainly. So what about the suspect? What does Richard James Tucker look like? And our lawyer, Samuel Williams? Well, I mentioned they could be anyone. We've had, again, as I mentioned, victims come from all walks of life, so do defendants. We had a Brian Robinson. Some of you guys may know, in North Alabama, said that he was going to build the Disney World of Alabama. Dream Vision is what it's called. In 2015, he made a very public announcement about this. Had the press, the media were out there and talked about this beautiful theme park. He's a fraudster. He collected nearly $10 million from investors and diverted it to personal expenses. So this was a businessman with a business background. We've had doctor defendants try to sell a stud finder breast cancer device, and believe me, it looked just like a stud finder, and you can only imagine how this thing was going to work. Like lawyers, just like you heard Sam Williams, we have lawyers under indictment now in Jefferson County. It could be just your average crook, non-educated or uneducated individuals who were just stealing but happened to promise a return, which gave us jurisdiction over the case. So anybody. In the senior arena, caregivers sometimes are perpetrators of securities fraud and financial exploitation. We've had family members, and I know you guys being in the homes of some of these folks, sometimes you may see it. I will freely admit to you that we had a family member arrested for senior abuse in my family. My 95-year-old grandfather, who was 10 years ago completely mentally cogent, would have never thought twice about calling the IRS back and giving him, if the IRS calls and leaves you those suspicious messages on your answer machine, he would have immediately deleted it. But now at 95, because of time, and unfortunately, if we live long enough, we will all experience some mental decline. I'm closer to 40 than I am 35, and I have trouble remembering names at times, so it's a fact of life. And now he'll call and ask, hey, look, is the IRS really coming after me if I don't call and give him my credit card number. I said, Granddad, you can't do that. That's a fraudster. But so now we have a family member that has been stealing from him. So it happens, guys. It happens to everyone. And don't turn a blind eye. If you see it, suspect something, give us a call. We'll go in and look at it. We've partnered with DHR for years. They've been a great partner in enforcing a new act that I'll talk about in a minute. But they're the experts that can go in and evaluate the home, and then we'll come in and look at it from the financial side. So I'll move on. The suspect, let's see if, I think, I'm going to play another video because I want you guys to hear about, from this victim's perspective, about how he encountered the perpetrator in this case. In this case, the defendant is another lawyer, and I don't want you guys to leave thinking that lawyers are all defendants in fraud cases. They're not. These are just the bad ones that we're highlighting.
About this investment opportunity on Friday, September the 22nd of 2006. That happens to be the day that I sold my business. It was over in Mr. Mitch McNabb's office in Dothan, Alabama, and he said that the sale of the business was in two portions: the inventory and the prescriptions, and then the real estate was a portion of it. And he suggested that we take the real estate portion of it, that I may want to do a 1031 exchange. And he explained to me what a 1031 exchange was. But the beauty of it was that he would guarantee me 6% interest until I decided to do something with the money. On Tuesday, November the 26th, about 8 o'clock in the morning, I called Mr. McNabb's office. Several days prior to this, my wife had reminded me that it was beginning to be the Christmas shopping season. And previously, I had called Mr. McNabb and asked for him to send me some money we bought 2 vehicles. We did some other things in which I would call him, in just a matter of 2 or 3 days, I would receive the check in the amount that I'd requested. I had called him several days prior to this Tuesday date, and I had not received my check on Monday. And on Tuesday morning, I called his office to find out what had happened to our check, that if he had sent it, did it get lost in the mail, or what had happened to it. His receptionist, when I called, she said, can I help you in some way? I can ask about the nature of your call. And I just explained to her what I explained to you, that I had requested some money several days earlier and that I had not gotten my check. And his receptionist said, you don't know about Mr. McNabb, do you? And I said, I don't know about Mr. McNabb what? She said, he was arrested yesterday. And of course, immediately at that time, all of the air inside of me seemed to be sucked out. And I said, for what reason was he arrested? And she said, misuse of client funds. And, you know, some small talk after that, but that's basically how I found out about Mr. McNabb. I can tell you that this had a great effect upon me, how I view any kind of individual, any kind of profession, whether it be a doctor, whether it be a school administrator, a pharmacist, and certainly an attorney. That really, you think you know the people, you think that you can trust them, but when it comes down to it, there's a lot of things that an individual should do before they choose an attorney. They need to ask a lot of questions. They need to find out about liability, find out about their degree, find out if they're in a good standing with the Alabama Bar Association. Just questions on and on I could go. And if that individual, that attorney, does not provide you with those answers to those questions, you need to immediately get up and exit the building, because if they are hiding something from you, if they don't want to provide those answers, then that should be a red flag. Something is wrong here. I don't need to seek the advice of this individual. My story, my wife's story is bad. We are still able to retire. That was a small portion of the money from the sale of our business, but there were a lot of people there that day that testified against Mr. McNabb, that literally their lives are destroyed forever. People that were there taking care of family members that had stage 4 cancer. A mother had left her son that was a paraplegic money to take care of him after she passed away. And now that money is gone, and I don't know what that's going to happen to that individual. There were a lot of sad stories. A lady there that she and her husband had been in business for a number of years and owned a service station, and the husband had passed away. And Mr. McNabb got many millions of dollars from her. And it's a sad situation. This lady depended on that not only to live for her livelihood, but also to pass some on to her children and her grandchildren. And now she doesn't have that capability. There were a lot of really sad stories that were told in the courtroom that day.
You guys, you just heard from another victim with devastating consequences. And these victims trusted these individuals. And I emphasize again, I don't want everybody to leave this webinar thinking we can't trust anyone. I don't want to discourage that. You can, but ask the right questions. Ask questions. If they can't explain it, if they can't provide you documentation and you verify it, maybe with referral through us, then don't give them their money. Don't give over your money. A lot of the victims from the McNabb case, which some of you may have heard about in the Dothan area, lost everything. We've had victims in their late 70s and 80s who have had to go back to work. One of them he was a retired ophthalmologist, and he went back to Walmart on Saturdays just to work in his golden years after being ripped off by an attorney in Birmingham, Alan Burdett. We've had an elderly lady have to turn to public welfare and food stamps after giving her money over to a fraudster who she trusted for a long time. The victim that you just heard from mentioned, he talked about several of the other victims. One of them a quadriplegic, and one of them had cancer, and they needed more money for treatment. So the reasons why people invest vary, but they do it, and you just don't know until you're in that situation what you might do. I want to read just a short excerpt before I move on from another victim. This one was just so impactful, and I really think it communicates the egregiousness of these cases. This involved the husband of a quadriplegic who had run out of money buying the various things needed, the treatment and the equipment for his wife to live. And you guys know insurance doesn't cover everything. And so he turned to a longtime friend to seek additional funds. And I'm just reading directly from the transcript of the case pre-trial before we indicted him. We did indict him. He got a 20-year sentence. But I'll let him tell you why he invested. He said, well, my wife became quadriplegic and we had to have round-the-clock care. And the cost, it was more than we brought in with our retirement and Social Security. As you guys know, having people come in-house care providers is expensive. So I was using up my savings, and I know, I'd mentioned that I wish I could do something else. And he contacted us, he being the defendant, and left a message saying, well, let me manage your savings. I think I can make you some money. The victim says, okay, our investigator's asking, okay, so how do you know him? The victim says, well, Mr. Burdett, the defendant, lived 2 houses down, the second house up, and well, we trusted him with our lives. The Burdetts were the kind of people that you meet once in a lifetime. So we just figured, we knew his parents, the daughter, and they were the salt of the earth. You just can't get any better than that. So I trusted Alan Burdett. It didn't take long for them to realize that they would never get that money back. And it was the majority of his life savings that he invested with Alan and lost it entirely. So these crimes hurt. They're financial crimes. There's no bloodshed, but they do have devastating consequences. So what can we do about these cases? I've just talked about the victims and you guys heard from it, so I'm going to skip over some of these for now and talk about what we can do. I mentioned the securities fraud laws in Alabama. Any type of fraud that happens in connection with the security, we have jurisdiction over it. Those are Class B felonies, 2 to 20 years prison, restitution, and we can punish the offender. But we also have a law on the books since 2013 protecting Alabama's Elders Act. this is a beautiful law for two reasons. One, it applies to people age 60 and older. I know my mom was just astounded to learn that she was an elder at age 60, but that's the case in Alabama, and fortunately for us, because it extends the statute of limitations an additional 2 years. With these cases, they're historical mostly in nature, so we have to go back to the records in order to prove the crime. Oftentimes, the defendant is sending the victim messages and lulling him or her into a false sense of security by telling them more lies or providing them false documents, so they don't know they've become victims of fraud until years down the road. So having the 7-year statute of limitations, I'm going to pull the slide I thought. Here, I'm getting to it. And sorry, we had to break these slides up a bit because there was so much information. So as you can see, the prosecution, there's a 7-year statute of limitations. That's important. And the victim does not have to be mentally incompetent in any way. So age 60 and older is the threshold for these crimes. I'll go back for just a minute. So the penalties, again, it enhances criminal penalties. So any theft, essentially $2,500 and over, is a Class B felony, and we can prosecute those cases. And the crime includes financial exploitation, which we've talked about, any type of theft of a senior, and it also includes physical abuse and mental abuse, which you guys are familiar with, but the law should be on your PowerPoint. So I'm going to move on to talk about another protection we have in place. In 2016, the Securities Commission asked for this piece of legislation to require our financial planners, the people that you and I deal with and who manage our finances, and a lot of seniors have financial planners because they have accumulated wealth in anticipation of living out their golden years through a retirement and having the sense of security, well, the financial security in order to do that. So a lot of people have financial planners at this age. So this law requires those financial planners to report to us and DHR, and this is where our partnership has really been enhanced with the Department of Human Resources, is through this law. If the financial planner suspects financial exploitation of a senior citizen. And this law, like I said, it only applies to financial planners, not banks, but we take complaints and referrals from anyone and everyone, and we have received complaints from the banking industry as well. And I just skipped over several slides. Let me go back. This is what you guys probably already know, but since you have boots on the ground and you're out there, if you see any type of financial exploitation or suspect it, call us. You can call me. I think I'll have my contact number somewhere, but I'll give you my personal cell phone number right now if you want to write it down. It's 334-590-8222. That's 334-590-8222 if you have any questions. But I've just given you a couple of examples of red flags of financial exploitation. These aren't all bright line. In other words, if you see this, it's not usually immediately financial exploitation, but maybe there's a pattern, or you see a couple of them taking place between a victim and somebody he or she knows. So let me pull a pretty good one. The third point on this slide, elder is not aware of or does not understand recently completed financial transactions. This is probably the red flag that we see the most, because when we contact the victim, we start asking them questions and they can't answer them. They don't understand because the defendant has bullied them into investing or giving money over, usually by throwing out some fancy, sophisticated financial terms and putting complicated documents in front of them, and usually the defendant will talk to the victim, the elderly victim, like he or she is a child. And it's just so unfortunate because when we get older, we tend to be more trusting at times, and they completely take advantage of that relationship and usually try to talk over them or talk like that person wouldn't understand the transaction anyway if he did take the time to explain it. So it's very patronizing, but that is what we often see. So if you guys are in the field, start asking questions. If that person can't answer them, maybe dig a little deeper. We see power of attorney abuse. Oh goodness, it's everywhere. People will file powers of attorney and then file over a power of attorney, and then another person will file a power of attorney. Those are tricky. So watch out for those. Just because somebody has a power of attorney doesn't necessarily mean that they are the person that should have that authority. Suspicious or manipulated documents, fraudulent documents are everywhere. If you look closely though, because our defendants, most of them are just pretty stupid, there's always a misspelled word, or there's a misplacement of a character on a page. We see a lot of poorly edited documents. Forged, suspicious signatures on checks. Defendants are also, if they would just quit doing this, they might get a little further in their scam, but they'll write what the purpose of the check or the money is intended, the check is intended for in the memo line. They'll ask the victim to put in the memo line investment, so it's pretty clear that we have jurisdiction over it. So check the memo lines of the checks if you guys are involved in any way in that, because that sometimes gives you a clue. The consequences, you guys have heard from several of our victims. I have two more that I want you to hear from because I just, again, want to emphasize how important it is that we in the community help bring these cases to light. I mentioned a couple of them on the screen. The last one, Mr. Burdett, I talked about. Carl is the optometrist, and Jean is the elderly lady that had to turn to food stamps and welfare in their golden years after they had a secure retirement that was stolen by Alan Burdett. I mentioned I've mentioned that we have the familial disputes and sons stealing from grandmother's brokerage account. I see a lot of sons and grandsons stealing from their grandparents and parents. Most often son to grandmother, but I don't want you grandmothers to go back and start suspecting your grandson of stealing from you, because that's not always the case, but we do see some of those. So it's there. It does happen in the families. And just like domestic violence cases, we prosecute family members for doing that. We prosecute family members for stealing. This first one, Miss Delchamps, this is a church incident, and the defendant was a female. She sat next to Miss Delchamps in church for years. Miss Delchamps had told her during a conversation one day that she was saving for her granddaughter's college tuition, and that Miss Delchamps would have loved to, or would like to be able to pay for her granddaughter's entire tuition. So the defendant, seeing an opportunity here, told Miss Delchamps that she would take the money and invest it in her real estate program. And the lady did take it, and she invested it right into her bank account and then spent it entirely on her personal expenses. We were just incredulous that this woman sat next to her in church for years. We did bring the defendant in and gave her an opportunity to confess and see what she would say and make it right. Well, she lied, as defendants do. Even though we had her bank records, unbeknownst to her, we had them concealed by several brown files. And when we asked this woman, the defendant, what steps she took to make these real estate investments, or how did you invest this money? How were you going to make this return to the victim? She was very evasive in her responses. She said, well, I contacted a friend about some real estate in South Alabama, and I contacted somebody about advertising, and we would bore down on her with questions. Well, who did you contact? Which company? Where was the real estate located? Of course, she couldn't answer any, but we were just setting her up to bring out the bank records. We finally did, pulled out the records, and I said, well, what at Walmart did you do in order to generate an investment return? What at Dillard's? What at Belk's? What at the gas station? And it was just entirely personal expense. Of course, she couldn't answer. And then she burst into tears, and so I had to get up and leave. But when I stepped out the room, I did hear her praying to God to help her out of this situation. Believe it or not, she has come back and taken more money from an elderly victim. So they're out there, and they're not just males. I talked about the gold and precious metals, and the unsuitability thing for those of you who may not know about suitability versus unsuitability. Some seniors are told by financial planners to invest in certain products, and some of the products require a 10, 15, 20-year investment period. So the client can't withdraw money for 10, 15, 20 years. Well, if you're 85 years old and your financial planner is telling you to invest in one of these for 10, 15, 20 years, that would be an unsuitable investment. So we see some of that, and we'll prosecute it. Let me play, I want you guys to hear from the Dothan lawyer victims, a couple of those. The next two, Miss West and Mr. Bajellan, Miss West is from the McNabb, and I'll talk about the other one in between. But just listen to what Miss West has to say.
Over a 25-year period, he helped me. I sold some property to my brother. He helped me with that. Just constant help. If I had a dime for every time I talked to him, I'd be sitting on the French Riviera now. I mean, he was very, very much like a son to me. I trusted him. I depended on him. He knew it. I relied on him. He helped me tremendously. I was going to get about 3%, so it wasn't like I was going to get. Of course, I would have questioned it at the time if it was 12 or 15%, so it was about 3%, and it was going to be in a money market account that he had met someone who was very close to someone when he was at the University of Alabama, and they had set up this money market account, and that several of his other clients were in it. Very well known in Dothan. And I completely trusted him. And I had lived in New York for a very long time, so I was not naive, but I was certainly naive in dealing with him. I can't tell you how much trust I had in him. Being comfortable with Mr. McNabb and the fact that he was an attorney and his trust account, that says it all. And I had dealt with him for so long and had known him, and he had helped. My brother had asked him some questions. He had helped my mother. So we had a long history during the whole process of it, and communicating with him. He would send me a check every month for interest with a statement signed by him. I would call him to see how everything was going and still talk to him, daily basis on property in Dothan, so we were always communicating with each other. He would tell me in regard to this investment, everything was fine. Once again, that he had lots of other clients, and other clients were getting involved in it. I mean, I was really shocked. I found out he had very fancy cars, had built a parking spot for him in a town close to Dothan, and had a plane. In fact, his daughter had a Jaguar, the son had a Maserati, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not a car person. He didn't travel, but his family traveled a lot. In fact, in one of his planes, he flew the daughter's hairdresser in Dothan to Tuscaloosa at the University of Alabama to have her hair fixed for the function. Just devastated. People with grandchildren with brain cancer, having a very tough time getting money for the child to be treated. I mean, it was just, it would bring anybody to tears. There were stories after story after story of that, of similar stories about how there's one gentleman that has Parkinson's disease, and he was a pharmacist, and he got wiped out, and he can't, I mean, they are living on Social Security, and it's very difficult, very. In a court hearing, Mr. McNabb's son and daughter were there, and saw this gentleman, and he was just pitiful. And I know that after the ruling, and after Mr. McNair was sentenced, that his daughter drove away in a Jaguar. And that just, if they would sell the Jaguar and give it to the gentleman with the fair religion, I just don't see how a family could continue living as high as reported and live with themselves. It's just beyond me.
I was trying to get money to build a public airport that I'd been working on for 20-some years, and I ran out of bank loans and hard money. I couldn't get a loan, and I had a loan agent that ran across these cash-back bank instruments. And anyway, he had a friend in Fresno that Pat Patterson that he'd worked with in the years past. I didn't do much investigating because I relied on my loan agent to look into it. And the only thing I did do is I had my attorney look at it, and he looked it over. He didn't say no. And anyway, I did go on the computer and looked up cashback bank instruments, and they did exist, these type loans. And so I was really at the end of the line trying to find some money to complete the project. And so I went ahead and I had some cash from a airplane that I sold, and anyway, I went ahead and signed the papers. And okay, Sam Williams, the attorney I sent the money to, I trusted him to carry out the agreement, and the agreement was part of it is if they didn't fund the loan that they would give us our money back. And I never ever, we tried my loan agent tried, for months and months and months to try to get in touch with anybody from Alabama. And like I say, we didn't get a hold to even Mr. Tucker until 5 months after the loan agreement was signed. I sent my money to the lawyer, I think it was in December 12th of 2009. And they were supposed to have funded it before January 1st. And and then after January 1st, all we could get when we would ask them, when it was going to be funded, they would always give us in 45 days or something like that, and it just went on and on and on, and nothing ever happened. I went to my lawyer, and he looked it all over, and he never said no, but he didn't say yes either, and so he left me hanging, and I think if the lawyers were trained, or aware of this type of a loan action, that probably would have saved me.
All right, you guys have just heard from our last two victims for purposes of this training. The first one, Miss West, was a victim of the Dothan lawyer fraud, and she said that she was receiving interest payments. So he kept the scheme going by providing them a small payment that we determined was a Ponzi payment, which is money that he took from a later investor to repay an earlier investor. So he was just repaying her a little interest with investor funds. So he kept the scheme going for some time until eventually, as all Ponzi schemes do, like Bernie Madoff, it falls apart. He can't get any more new investor money. So when he was finally uncovered, people were just devastated in that area. We did seize, I want you guys to know, the plane. We can have, under asset forfeiture, we can seize any of the fruits of the crime. So anything that he purchased with the investor's money, we seized and are in the process of selling to repay what we can to some of these victims. The second one, and to jump into the second video, is another victim of the Richard Tucker scam. The first one that we talked about, and I want to emphasize that in the criminal cases, the responsibility is not on the the victim, to discover that the crook is a crook. We punish the defendant. The defendant is required to make those representations He's required to tell you the truth when he takes your money. And so the conduct that we punish is in the defendant. It's not up to the victim to do due diligence. So a lot of people think in securities fraud, well, the victim didn't do his or her homework. That's not the case. Maybe in a civil case, whether or not this person contributed in some way may be a factor, but in criminal fraud, the defendant's just ripped you off. And, are you supposed to check? I use this analogy. The crime report of a certain area before you stop into a gas station, it's no different in securities fraud. So I'm going to breeze through these last few slides because we're almost out of time. And so how to avoid financial victimization, we've talked about this. Call us and never feel pressured. If it's truly a good opportunity, the investment opportunity will wait until you've had a chance to talk to your friends, family, and financial advisors, those people that you trust and have verified that they are trustworthy. Obviously, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And should avoid, develop a refusal script. I tell this to some of the older ladies who live alone. Don't answer the phone, get an answer machine, and let all of those fraudulent calls go to voicemail. Don't check them. You don't have to. A lot of women I've seen and heard just from working the WSFA fraud line, I got tons of calls, 45, from people who were solicited over the phone and who couldn't hang up with these people. You can. Just hang up the phone. Don't listen to them. They won't seek money over the phone. Persuasion, y'all can read that. Underreporting, though, is what I want to leave you guys with. It is a problem. So if you guys, since your boots on the ground, see anything, ask questions. And if you need somebody to turn to, call us. Call the district attorney's offices. They have been very proactive in prosecuting some of these elder exploitation cases and even senior physical and mental abuse. So it's out there, but it is underreporting is a problem. Sometimes the seniors, if it's their caretaker, they're wondering who's going to take care of me. If this person goes away, will I have to go into a nursing home? You guys see it. One of the biggest fears is going into a nursing home. So they're afraid that might happen. A lot of times it's just embarrassment. They don't want to admit that their life savings have been stolen by a fraudster. So lots of different reasons, but you guys can talk to them and encourage them to do something about it. And I've given you my personal cell phone number, but there's my office and email as well. Thank you for your attention, and hopefully these slides and videos were helpful. And always call us if you have any questions.
Okay. I'm Julie Waters. And thank you. Thank you, Amanda. That was great.
Yeah, no, thank you, Julie.
I'm Julie Waters from the Alabama Department of Senior Services. And we do a lot of things at the Department of Senior Services, and I'm not going to go through those. But one thing that we do is Senior Medicare Patrol. And we try to educate the public about, and seniors, their caregivers, about Medicare fraud and Medicaid fraud, and how to detect it and then how to report it. So we're going to talk a little bit about healthcare fraud, but we're going to focus on the new Medicare cards, which some people are aware they're coming and many people are not. So the first slide that I'm going to, which way does it go? This way?
You're stuck on my slides.
Sorry.
There we go.
Okay, this is a picture of the new Medicare card, and this year the Medicare cards nationwide are starting to come out in April, or started in April, and they will be replaced with a unique Medicare number. It has 11 numbers and letters. The number is unique to you. It's randomly picked. And the card will look like this card right here, but there will be some unique identifiers to where you know that the card is legitimate, and that it, again, I said it will have 11 characters. And the positions 2, 5, 8, and 9 will always have an alphabetic symbol as opposed to a number. And it's extremely important that you know that there is no cost for this new Medicare card. Okay, we just went over that. The new card design was tested by people through Medicare and CMS. There were positive reviews among 10 different possible card designs, and this one was what was picked. There was a strong preference to keep the red, white, and blue. The new card is easier to read, it's easier to copy or scan. So it will be much easier for the provider to use this card, keep it on file, and bill Medicare. It is a smaller size, so it will fit just like a credit card in your wallet. It can come in English or Spanish. And the gender, your gender, and a signature line will no longer be on the new Medicare cards. And all cards will be printed on white paper. Many of those issues with the new card design are to help cut down on fraud, and that is the purpose of the new card. Medicare will start mailing the new cards, I said, in April, but in Alabama they are set to send the cards from June through August. You may know somebody that has gotten a card, but they've probably gotten a card because they changed their address or something significant happened that resulted in them getting a card sent to them earlier. But the standard issued cards will come out between June and August. And they will all be sent out by January 1, 2020, and only the new cards will be used after then. It's important for those that have railroad retirement to know that they will also be issuing new cards to the railroad beneficiaries, and they will be much following the same lines. They will not have their Social Security number on them. So, what should you do about in advance about the replacement cards? First, you should go on Social Security on the website or call and make sure, or if you know for sure because you've received correspondence, that your address is correct. If your address is not correct, it is very important that you go on the Social Security website or call Social Security and have your address changed. People in the future, if you lose your Medicare card, you will be able to get a replacement card, and they will replace your card and change it with a new randomly picked number. And anyone who believes that they are a victim of identity theft or Medicare fraud, before they get their new card, should contact 1-800-MEDICARE. There was a survey conducted by Medicare in September 2017, and one of the reasons we're doing this satellite webinar is to make sure that those of you who work in the field with the clients every day and work with their caregivers and your family members, that you're aware that there is a new card coming, and that there's only a few things that people need to be aware of, and that you can help to make sure that this process goes smoothly for someone and they don't end up being a victim of fraud just because something new is occurring. But only 11% in September 2017 reported that they knew that there was a new card coming. So that's a low number. But those who were surveyed were very positive about the change. Most people are positive about getting their Social Security number off of anything that they can. So that is a real positive thing about this card. But with this card, you can still have somebody scam you or have Medicare fraud, but they're not going to get your Social Security number. They're just going to be able to do something fraudulently with your health care, which could cause you a lot of problems too. So you've still got to guard the card. The greatest concern that people had about the cards were that there might be cost. And so therefore, one of the biggest messages that we need to get across is there is no cost for this card. And that's where there's a potential for fraud and scams, is that someone may contact the individual on the phone and tell them that they need to send money to pay for a new card. And Medicare, CMS, Social Security, they never contact anyone by phone or email. They only contact you through the mail. So there is no charge for the card. Hold on. Okay, one reason, too, that we wanted to do this webinar again, we want to make sure that those individuals who are working with people every day and are in their homes or see them, in offices, are educating people about the new cards that are coming out. There is information that you can get if you want to download it on www.cms.gov/newcard. There's tons of information. There's social media information. There's handouts. There's PowerPoints, anything you would need to share information with your constituents or family members. Also, we'll go back to my email and my address before the end. We also have some posters and some cards that we can send to you to post that you can share to get the message out. So when you get the new card, what do you need to do? And the first thing you need to do is keep that card safe, just like you did your old Medicare card. Now, we have been told two things. One, destroy your old Medicaid card immediately. And we've also been told, make sure your other card works first and then destroy the card. So I would recommend that you keep both cards until you make sure your Medicare card works the first time you go to the pharmacy or to your, the first time you go to your doctor. And then when you get home, the card needs to be shredded. It needs to be, you need to cut it up, or whatever you do not just throw the card in the trash. So other than that, you never give the card number out, and you never give any of your personal information out, which is what you've heard today. But there's so many different avenues of scams and healthcare fraud and everything else. It's just important to never give your personal information out unless it is somebody that you, a family member or your doctor, or in a situation like that. Your new card, again, I want to say is free, and that Medicare will only contact you by mail. Okay, another important thing that CMS has asked us to make sure people know is that your card, that again, the cards will come at different times. And so they have let us know that regionally, most of our cards will come out in June, possibly July and August. But if by the end of, say, November, you have not gotten a card, you need to contact 1-800-Medicare and let them know that you have not received your card. If you think during this whole process that you or a family member has given information out over the phone or have been a victim of fraud, please contact the Senior Medicare Patrol, which I will give you the number, and a representative will make a referral to the appropriate state and federal agencies for further investigation on your part. I'm going to go back because I think there is a slide that might be missing. Okay, one thing that I need to also say as far as for providers to get ready, it's important that providers that are billing Medicare also are aware of all of the information regarding the cards, that they are making people in their offices aware of the new card, and that they have followed through with Medicare. There's a Medicare Learning Network, again at www.cms.gov/newcard, for providers to be able to get the information that they need from the provider end. And some of you on this call may be providers, and it's important that you know what you need to do on your end. So, one of the huge problems that happen when you have a change like this is that that's when the con artists come out, don't they?
Sure enough.
Yep. It's an opportunity, because change opens up the opportunity to lie and to be deceitful, and it has already happened, but it will continue to happen, because some of the fraudsters might not know about the new Medicare card yet either. As soon as they do, though, the con artist will come out, and they will try to steal your Medicare number and your personal information. So guard your card. Don't talk to anyone over the phone about, this would be a lot like the IRS scams, where they call and say that they need personal information and they need you to send a check in order for you to get your new Medicare card. And just imagine how many seniors could buy into that with the right con artist, and send a small check or to get their Medicare card. So this is a really important message to get across. Okay, some other alerts is that people on Medicare need to be suspicious about activities, that they may get calls, may get something in the mail, an email, to enroll you in a Medicare plan with early bird discounts, limited time offers, offers of free medical services, anything like this. You need to call 1-800-Medicare or SMP, the Senior Medicare Patrol program, at 1-800-AGE-LINE to report any suspicious fraud activities like this, any phone calls, and they can verify if this is legitimate or not, but most of the time it is not legitimate. So there is a lot more technical information on the Medicare website, and there's a whole campaign around Guard Your Card, and you can download any of this information, and I suggest that you do that. You can personalize it because it's a big message to get out in a short period of time. Medicare fraud costs over $60 billion a year. That's taxpayer money, and that's Medicare funds that help to support the future of Medicare. Medicaid fraud is a staggering $140 billion a year. So one way law enforcement and new laws have made it where more people are being prosecuted. The opioid epidemic has caused more investigation and insight into healthcare fraud in general. That epidemic in itself shows up with Medicare Part D, where 5 years ago we started to see a rise in Part D expenditures, a big rise since the baby boomers have come on, and there is a national initiative to go after those individuals that are fraudulently billing Medicare and Medicaid because our expenses have gotten so high. So it's an issue for multiple reasons. Again, another way to prevent healthcare fraud is for you to make sure that you review your Medicare statements against your calendar. Did you go to the doctor on that day? Were you billed for something on a different day? Did you have the procedure you were billed for? Were you billed twice? And then contact your provider to make sure there wasn't a mistake. And if it's not if it is not settled to your satisfaction, then you need to report it to the Senior Medicare Patrol for someone to help you one-on-one, or 1-800-MEDICARE. This is by looking at your explanation of benefits and which would come with your Medicare Advantage plans and your Medicare Part B statements, and then the billings that you get is one way for you individually to be able to prevent some of this fraud. And so we offer training on how to look at those statements and how to review them, and then who to contact when you see something suspicious. So again, I would recommend that you that some of the providers out in the field might want to have in-services with their staff to learn how to do that, so that you can transfer that information to your clients. Because not all, for us at Senior Services, not only a small percentage of the people that we see are coming to senior centers or calling us on the phone through our No Wrong door. We need to reach out to everyone to get this message out and to help prevent the fraud that is the healthcare and Medicare fraud that is going on now by reaching people that we don't normally get to reach. I guess we've got time to have some questions.
Okay. This is a great opportunity for you to call or email your questions right now. I do have one email question that's already come in, so I'm going to read it for you guys. If I invest with someone in Alabama that is licensed, even though they have some issues showing up on their record with the Securities Commission, does that mean that it is not something I should be worried about? Would your office revoke their right to be a financial advisor if some serious issues are present?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we all make mistakes at times, and if you do make an inquiry and you learn that a particular financial planner has maybe just a mark in his background, maybe he did make one unsuitable investment, but we are cops on the beat, and we do police that. So based on the facts and circumstances of that case, we would have determined that he was okay to continue in his current job as a financial planner. Now, I'll say among states, we are particularly harsh on the regulated industry, the financial planners. So there would have been an administrative action of some type, maybe. Those are online. You can look under the enforcement action section on our website. But if there's a mark, if this person has discovered that their investment advisor it doesn't mean that they, obviously, we still allowed them to continue in that business. So, so they're capable and qualified of still handling your money. But if something goes wrong, report it to us because we do take those complaints very seriously, and we can revoke their license. And I'll just say something about what you've just talked about. Those losses are staggering, and guys, it affects us all. When we have losses that large, we pay in the form of increased premiums and other costs and fees associated with these services. I know Bloomberg, 8 days ago, I was in Washington and I got a little notice that said that that American seniors lose approximately $37 billion to financial scams. The losses were higher, in Medicare fraud. So we do pay, and we can't turn a blind eye to these types of crimes.
We've got another question.
Okay,
coming.
great.
What's the highest profile case that you've ever seen here in Alabama?
That's a loaded question. We've seen lots of high profile, and when the term high profile to me means generates a lot of media attention. So certainly in Alabama right now, the political cases are pretty high profile, but in the securities fraud arena, I'll just talk about my cases in particular. We've had a case in North Alabama, the Dream Vision I mentioned. We had a tomato caper, we called him, that sold to over 300 investors in North Alabama these greenhouses, and they were to be growing organic tomatoes. That generated a lot of publicity, and it was with the help of the Huntsville area BBB and a reporter in that area that helped shut him down and then prosecute him. So high profile can mean two different things. I know in the political arena, we've got a lot going on there, and those do attract a lot of attention. But in the investment side of it, it depends on the person. We have some defendants that are, putative defendants now under investigation that the public would consider maybe a celebrity type in Alabama. So it depends on the number of victims impacted. Public officials who misuse their offices to have people give them money or to promote investment type opportunities simply because they have the public's eye. We go after those as well, but there have been several. It just depends on the area. The McNabb lawyer, a lot of people knew him, and so those are pretty high profile. We had a guy out of Lee County, John David Stroud, who sold commodities. He went on air at Bloomberg. He was just so bold about his presentation that people trusted him, gave him money because he was on national television. He served time in prison. So I hope that answered your question in part, maybe.
Absolutely. We have time for maybe a couple more. I know in the front row right here we have a couple questions.
If someone is found guilty of securities fraud, what would a typical sentence be?
So under state securities fraud, there are sentencing guidelines in both state and federal court. The federal side does have very specific guidelines on those types of fraud, or that type of fraud, and on the state side, securities fraud is not subject to sentencing guidelines or a formula that would tell you how long you should serve in prison. But because securities fraud is a Class B felony and failure to register as an agent, if we prosecuted those cases, would be a Class C, and we do in some instances if it's just the licensee thing. Those range on a C, 1 to 10 years, and on a B felony, 2 to 20. Oftentimes we have multiple victims, so we'll charge the conduct accordingly. We may have a 2-count to a 52-count indictment. And so the sentences vary depending on the victim impact, the amount of the amount of money stolen or the loss amount, and the different things that the defendant did to commit that crime. More recently, with the amusement park guy, Brian Robinson, he received a 10-year straight sentence in prison. We had a 7-year sentence, Derek York, Robinson stole upwards of $10 million. York, several million dollars less on a 7-year sentence. We got 10 years for the guy I mentioned in Lee County, the commodities trader. 10 years for the tomato caper. We've had 20 to 60-year sentences as well for multi-million-dollar scams that affected hundreds of individuals, big Ponzi schemes. So it just depends.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. If we have another one. If we don't, we can wrap it up.
I have a question. What would you suggest people do when they get telephone calls? Because I think that, and those, and have you been able to prosecute anyone that was behind those type of fraud activities?
Yes, we do. I've had several cases that involved over-the-phone solicitations, and the victim had never met the defendant, but we were able to identify through a co-defendant or a co-conspirator or another witness who met the defendant. So yeah, absolutely. People take money over the phone all the time, and we prosecute those cases if we can get, in the criminal arena, enough evidence there. But over the phone, guys, don't give your money to anyone over the phone. Just don't do it. Hang up, get an answering machine. Anybody that's calling and asking for money over the phone, in my opinion, is a fraudster. And there are still people who invest, believe it or not, give money to family members who are allegedly locked up in a foreign prison. Y'all, it happens all the time. And, if we're lucky enough to live long enough, like some of our seniors, we would hope that somebody's looking out for us. And so that's what we do. We try to help these people understand that what they get over the phone is a fraud. So, yeah, just don't give any money based on a phone call. That's a good question.
Well, thank you both so much for being here and for all your valuable information.
Yeah, it was fun, Julie. Yeah. Learned something here about Medicare. Yeah, guard the card. I like
Guard the card.
This patrol, this senior Medicare patrol, we need a Securities Commission patrol. I like that. Thank you.
And thank you at home so much for watching today. You can find us online later on demand. Have a good day.